The man in protective gear opened the isolation door. He was immediately stunned by the apocalyptic scene before his eyes. The air was filled with radioactive dust particles. The bridge in front of him was completely destroyed. Not a single intact body could be seen. The survivors in the underground bunker were both shocked and lucky. No one expected the world to collapse so quickly. Next, they would have to shoulder the responsibility of maintaining human civilization in a bunker 300 meters underground. This man was Max. Before the disaster struck, Max was a playboy, but because of a car accident, his fate was completely changed. In that accident, Max abandoned his girlfriend to escape on his own. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for indirect murder. After Max went to prison, he suffered pain and regret. The huge amount of wealth he owned not only did not bring any benefits, but also made him a prime target for bullying. Until one day, the prisoners in the prison stuffed Max into an industrial washing machine. Max was tormented and on the verge of death for 16 minutes. When Max was pulled out, he felt that all the pain in this life had ended. At that moment, he was reborn. He staggered to his feet and laughed loudly at the prisoners who had bullied him. This somewhat crazy action received everyone's response. From then on, Max completely escaped the days of being bullied. He began to actively exercise. High-intensity training sessions every day, along with excellent performances in matches, helped Max quickly gain the respect of the prisoners. Max also gradually forgot the pain. However, the happy times were always short-lived. In the third year of Max's imprisonment, he suddenly received a notice of reduced sentence because of his good performance during the past time, so he could now be released from prison. Amidst the cheers of the prisoners, the man leisurely walked out of prison. Max saw his father, Rafa, waiting for him at the gate. Max's face was extremely cold. It turned out that their relationship had broken down since the car accident that year. Suddenly, 2 fighter jets flew over their heads. Rafa seriously told Max that in order to help him get out of prison early, Rafa had to try very hard. The situation outside was extremely tense, so Max was forced to go with Rafa to a top-secret underground bunker to take refuge. Max was extremely resistant because he had just been released from prison. He did not want to go back to an underground prison. However, Rafa said that Max's mother and grandmother had already arrived at the bunker. There was also the father of Max's deceased girlfriend. That last sentence made Max pause. He felt it was time to face up to his past mistakes. On the way to the bunker, Rafa told Max about the origin of that place. Rafa knew a military general in the tennis club, so Rafa accidentally learned that a few nobles in the country were secretly building a Doomsday bunker. Rafa almost lost all his fortune before he could exchange that precious ticket. This morning, Rafa received a notice from the bunker manager that the world situation was on the brink of losing control. They asked all residents to immediately enter the bunker. As soon as the 2 of them boarded the helicopter, they received information from Civil Aviation Control. To prevent the bunker's location from being revealed, all passengers were required to wear blindfolds during the flight. The helicopter finally landed on a bridge in the middle of the lake. The staff led the 2 to the elevator entrance. The bunker was built 300 meters underground. Based on the cave system formed 45 million years ago, it could withstand most nuclear bombs. Moreover, there was a natural gas mine underground, enough for 45 families to live for 10 years. Soon, the 2 arrived at the reception desk. The staff took back both of their communication devices, saying that it would not be discovered. The bunker took 7 years to build. The perimeter of the complex alone was 20,000 meters. The facilities inside were also extremely complete. The residents' uniforms could instantly monitor the level of pollution and air quality. The orange-shirted guards led by the manager would always serve and protect the residents. Entering the living room could change the outdoor scenery. Max finally reunited with his mother and grandmother. Rafa kept an eye on the news on the big screen. The Russian defense minister called an emergency press conference and announced a strong response to some provocations. The whole family went to the restaurant. At that moment, they met Max's deceased girlfriend's family. The atmosphere became heavy in an instant. Max sincerely expressed his remorse, but Max's ex-girlfriend's father, Gilmer, remained cold. It was clear that Gilmer had never forgiven the person who killed his daughter. The 2 families had been very close before, but after that tragedy, they completely cut off contact. Gilmer politely introduced his new wife. It turned out that only half a year after his daughter's death, his ex-wife also passed away in a car accident. Gilmer spoke very openly and did not show any hatred towards Max. However, Max's ex-girlfriend's younger sister, Asia, was not at all pleasant. During the meal, she bluntly sarcastically asked how could anyone be so cruel as to abandon his dying girlfriend. Max once again remembered that fateful night, but Max did not say anything to explain. The atmosphere became more and more awkward. At this time, the bunker manager and the staff entered the dining room. She announced the bad news that the situation in the Atlantic had escalated. She asked everyone to prepare for a long stay in the bunker. Then she also emphasized realized a few things to note. Because the service staff here was limited, the residents were forced to do simple things like getting their own food and washing their own dishes after eating. These things seemed simple at first, but for the rich who were used to living a comfortable life, they were not comfortable. Considering the serious situation outside, everyone could only suppress their dissatisfaction. After all, this was not their home. Returning to their room, Gilmer's calm exterior finally crumbled. While eating, Gilmer almost stabbed Max in the head with a steel fork. In Gilmer's eyes, the person who blamed his daughter was just a bastard who was good at pretending. His new wife tried to comfort him, but he yelled at her. Max met Asia again in the gym. He didn't want her to live in hatred forever, so he showed her the phone his girlfriend left at the scene of the accident. Asia immediately returned to her room and flipped through the album inside. Most of them were videos of her sister being intimate with Max. Looking at the bright smile on her sister's face, Asia could hardly believe that he could do such a cruel thing. Gilmer was upset and went to the restaurant to drink, but the staff informed him that each resident was limited to 2 drinks a day. He was about to complain when the ground suddenly shook. The screen in the cafeteria started flashing. A loud alarm sounded. The bunker was under attack. Everyone was told to go to the bottom of the dome, the safest place in the bunker. At this moment, the entire bunker shook violently. Everyone ran and crying. Asia went against the flow of people to the bar. She saw Rafa and Max coming out with an axe to her father. At that moment, she felt a little emotional. She even felt that Max was not as hateful as before. The group hurriedly entered the elevator, but halfway through, an accident happened. The elevator lost control and plummeted down. Everyone was in great despair. Fortunately, the emergency brake system kicked in time. They panicked and stepped out of the elevator. They followed the crowd into the safe area under the dome. The screen in the lobby was broadcasting live global news. The war situation was completely out of control. Most countries were involved in this war. Everyone's mood hit rock bottom. Is the World War really coming? At this time, the manager stepped onto the podium and announced that the Atlantic Alliance base south of the bunker had just suffered a nuclear attack. Because of its close proximity, the bunker felt the tremors clearly. The situation outside was extremely complicated. Next, everyone must remain calm because this was still the safest place in the world. Immediately after, several screens showed mushroom clouds after the explosion. Immediately after, the signal began to be interrupted. The bridge outside the bunker also exploded, accompanied by a loud bang. The entire lobby was plunged into darkness. The manager panicked and said that she had to go to the control center. The upper-class people in the lobby were talking uneasily. They came to live in the bunker to avoid nuclear war. Who would have thought that day would come so quickly? Rafa saw that the world was about to end, so he decided to tell the truth about the car accident. In fact, Max did not abandon his girlfriend, but immediately called Rafa for help. Rafa rushed to the scene to help the drunk Max escape the crime. Rafa forced Max to run into the forest to hide. It was only when Rafa was tried that his conscience bothered him that he told the whole truth. Rafa did not want to use lies to help Max avoid responsibility. Max was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison. This secret surprised both families. Max's grandmother angrily scolded Rafa for his erratic behavior, causing Max to waste 3 years of his life. But Max's mother firmly stood by Rafa. She believed that Rafa's actions were to help Max complete his atonement. At this time, the manager stepped out and announced that she had just confirmed with the staff. The antenna connecting to the outside was broken, so they were forced to send someone to fix it. In order for everyone to be able to grasp the situation outside in time, she would ask the staff to open the live broadcast. At this time, the head of the security department and a subordinate were wearing protective gear. Under everyone's worried eyes, the two of them opened the heavy-duty isolation door. The scene outside was no different from the apocalypse. Radioactive dust flew into the sky. The radiation level in the air seriously exceeded the standard. Even the temperature continued to rise. When the camera flashed images of charred corpses, everyone was horrified. The severity of the apocalypse was beyond imagination. At this time, the supervisor warned that the temperature and radiation were still rising rapidly. The two of them had no choice but to hastily install the antenna. But during the operation, one person's glove stuck to the metal railing, burning the armor. He no longer had the mind to install the antenna and used a screwdriver to tear off the glove. At this point, completing the mission was impossible. But because the torn gloves were definitely contaminated with a large amount of radiation, the staff hurriedly turned off the camera, making the survivors even more nervous. The manager only gave a few words of comfort before turning around and leaving the hall. When she passed through the code door, the tense expression on her face immediately disappeared. The staff in the control room happily applauded. It turned out that all of this was just a carefully arranged trick. But what was their purpose? Was it simply to deceive people to get rich, or was it a doomsday experiment on humanity? Time went back 7 years. The leader of the group of scammers, Minerva, believed that the key to success was to make the upper class believe in the Doomsday. This group of people patiently waited until the geopolitical situation became tense. Once the local conflict broke out, that would be their moment to perform. Minerva used the reason of escalating war and informed the trapped billionaires to go to the shelter. Then the team members began to coordinate their acting. They deliberately created chaos on the streets and created the illusion of jostling. Even before the helicopter took off, Go gave fake air traffic control orders. In fact, from the moment they received the call, everything the crowd saw and heard was under the control of the Minerva team. From the escalating news shown on the screen, they would gradually lead the billionaires to believe that World War III was coming. Another key part of the show was the simulation of an attack. In fact, this bunker was not built in an underground cave, but mounted on a mechanical platform that could vibrate and move at will without damaging the overall structure. Of course, this was just the basic condition for simulating war. Minerva's special effects team had specially created countless sound and visual effects to coordinate with the prepared giant boulder breaking scene. That was enough to achieve a realistic falsetto effect to increase the sense of tension. They also sprayed dozens of tons of dust from the cracks in the tunnel. They even set up a free-fall helicopter scene, making the billionaires scream in fear and despair, feeling the proximity of death. It was only when their psychological defenses collapsed in fear and despair that Minerva began to launch the apocalypse scene. What the billionaires were watching was actually a special effects film disguised as a news bulletin. The nuclear bomb explosion scene alone took 2 years to complete. The part where the security captain went to the surface to repair the antenna was actually filmed in an abandoned quarry and processed with digital effects there. The detail of the gloves sticking to the hot railing is the perfect highlight to erase the last doubts of the billionaires. They finally accept that they are survivors in the apocalypse. Even though they normally live in luxury, they are now forced to adapt to life in the bunker. When living in a cramped and stuffy environment, the rich merchants begin to think wildly. Some think that humanity is about to perish. Others think about how to rebuild their homeland. This strange atmosphere quickly leads to the first tragedy: a woman who already suffered from anxiety. She tried to find a way to die in the toilet. Fortunately, Asia called the medical staff to save her. The only female doctor in the bunker expressed concern that this scam could drive many people crazy. However, Minerva firmly replied that this was not a job but the most important mission in her life. The next plan was also determined. The security chief would be disguised as a radiation victim. They had to make sure everything was as real as possible to erase the billionaires' thoughts of leaving the underground bunker. Not long after, a few residents unexpectedly received an invitation, including Gilmer's new wife. This group of people had the same blood type as the security chief. Perhaps they would need it when they were treated later. Minerva deliberately arranged the operating room right next to the blood collection room. Through the transparent glass window, Mimi saw the security chief's ulcerated skin. Combined with the doctor's panicked scream, that strong shock immediately broke down everyone's psychological defenses. They told their relatives and friends what they witnessed. At this time, everyone completely believed in the theory of the end of the world. They were scared and desperate. In contrast, Minerva's team was clapping their hands together to celebrate the success of this performance. Only the female doctor felt lost. She really couldn't stand the deception of manipulating other people's emotions, especially when someone almost lost their life because of it. The female doctor decided to leave this place full of lies. Of course, Minerva wouldn't agree, because once she went out, she would most likely reveal the secret of the underground bunker. No matter how Minerva threatened or promised, the female doctor was determined not to change her mind. A team member, James, saw this scene through the surveillance screen and immediately ran over. James took out a few sedative pills but was thrown away by the female doctor. In a fit of anger, he pushed her hard. She immediately lost her balance, screamed, and fell down the hallway. After the initial panic, Minerva quickly regained her composure. Minerva suggested that the female doctor's death be considered suicide. Then, in front of everyone, Minerva announced that the security chief had died from radiation injuries. As for the female doctor, because she could not save her teammates, she felt guilty and chose death. While everyone was sad, the manager immediately announced new regulations. The underground bunker would be switched from preventive lockdown to indefinite lockdown. All living supplies would be distributed according to stricter distribution standards. Gilmer returned to his beautiful young wife's room. He was eager to take a bath together. The two were immersed in intimacy, but they did not know that their every move was being monitored by the Minerva team through cameras. The woman smiled coldly in her heart. Past memories flashed through her mind. Gilmer was born into a prominent family and was one of the country's leading tycoons. The assets under his name covered the fields of electronic components and marine energy. Currently, he manages 64 headquarters companies, spanning more than 40 countries. In fact, Minerva has been targeting this billionaire for a long time. Even if everyone here worked for 10 generations, it would not equal 1% of his assets. What Minerva really wants is to break the shackles of class so that every member of her team has the opportunity to become a billionaire. After using every trick, they made the rich believe in the existence of the apocalypse. The next step is to find every way to transfer the billionaires' assets to their hands. Minerva has also prepared for this. As soon as the billionaires set foot in the underground bunker, her team confiscated their phones for safety reasons. In fact, they are used to answer calls, text messages, and many advanced artificial intelligence technologies. They can even update the social networks of dozens of rich people in real time. In the end, just making up a reason like going on vacation can temporarily hide their disappearance, guaranteed that in the short term, no one will call the police. Of course, this is just a delaying tactic. Artificial intelligence records the billionaires' speech and behavior day by simulating their intonation and habits, gradually creating a perfect copy. This is also the key for Minerva to transfer their assets. The first target of harvesting is Gilmer. Therefore, monitoring him is especially strict. Unfortunately, the group's assistant is very responsible. The two were university classmates, so they know each other very well. Before long, he became suspicious of Gilmer's strange behavior. However, the AI responded very skillfully with an extremely annoyed tone, asking him not to disturb Gilmer's vacation. Meanwhile, another billionaire, Rafa, after arguing with his wife, his mood was completely out of control. He walked into the dining room like a wild beast, gnawing at each piece of meat. When the security guard tried to stop Rafa, he pulled out his electric baton. At this moment, Max suddenly appeared. Max warned the guard to release his father. Seeing that the security guard did not listen, Max immediately used the wrestling skills he had trained in prison. Very quickly, Max controlled his opponent. More and more guards arrived. It seemed like a melee was about to break out. The force manager immediately ordered everyone to intervene at the same time, forcefully suppressing the situation. The guard felt humiliated. That night, he went to Max alone and demanded back the electric baton that had been stolen earlier. Faced with this clumsy provocation, Max did not hesitate to take action again. This time, Max still took the initiative. The months of hard training Max had undergone in prison were not in vain. The guard was beaten up, so he was very angry. He picked up the metal bar and violently hit the ground. The loud noise quickly attracted his accomplices, but Max did not choose to stop. Max quickly defeated his opponent. No one noticed that the headset fell. Seeing that the guard was unconscious, everyone rushed him to the medical room. However, the only female doctor was dead. The remaining nurse had only basic first aid training, so she was completely clueless about how to handle complex brain injuries. Right now, the only way was to take them to the emergency room. But once they left the underground bunker, Minerva's trick would be exposed. Just when everyone was confused, someone saw Asia treating Max's arm. It turned out that Asia had studied at the medical institute for 5 years. Asia's experience far surpassed that of some of the nurses in the bunker. Soon, Asia was invited to the medical room. Seeing the unconscious guard, she boldly guessed that he did not have a brain injury, but a respiratory failure that led to a coma due to lack of oxygen. After being injected with a special medicine, this person gradually opened his eyes. Asia's image in his eyes was like a shining angel with a holy halo. Asia's actions not only saved a life, but also helped the culprit avoid punishment. If there really was a murder, Minerva would probably send him back to prison. However, what Max cared about was something else. Minerva did not answer, but she pulled out the electric baton from Max. This was both a punishment for his previous actions and a warning. Minerva understood the complexity of people's hearts. No one was willing to stay in the underground bunker, isolated from the world forever. Therefore, she had to always bring them some new stimulation. The next scenario was given by the bearded man. He built a communication room in the room closest to the ground and invited the residents to use the radio to constantly monitor the signals from outside. At first, no one got anything, so they assumed that there were no survivors outside, until Mimi's radio picked up a distress signal. Private plane running out of fuel asked to land on a warship but was coldly refused. In the control room, two actors were trying their best to play the roles of two sides communicating. Until an explosion rang out, the radio fell into deathly silence. The billionaires were still immersed in the tension and conflict just now. They once again witnessed the cruelty of the apocalypse. Officially, this group of fire diggers had completely trapped the billionaires in the bunker. Next, it was time to transfer their assets. The artificial intelligence quickly collected a large amount of data through monitoring and quickly developed into a near-perfect virtual copy. Its demeanor and actions were almost indistinguishable from a real person. But Gilmer's assistant, Jackson, always felt that there was something unusual about Gilmer. For many years, Gilmer had placed great importance on a technology company, and recently, with great difficulty, he had managed to seize the opportunity to acquire it. However, Gilmer went on vacation abroad and refused to return. Gilmer even handed over all the business to Jackson. In his haste, Gilmer accidentally uttered a string of letters and numbers. Everyone was stunned. Minerva quickly pretended to have a signal error and began searching the Falcon Corporation database. But Minerva still could not find the meaning of this code. It was not until they hacked into Gilmer's deceased daughter's social media account that they learned that the code Jackson had spoken was actually the name of a racehorse. The AI immediately called Jackson back and temporarily stabilized the situation. But the real difficulty came soon after. The transaction contract was locked in the safe at President's house. Although the assistant had the authority, he had to have the safe's password to get the contract. This task was much more difficult than looking up the data. While he was resting at the soccer field, his father suddenly found a Bluetooth headset. It was the item that the security guard he had knocked down had dropped. Out of curiosity, he tried it on and heard his father's voice talking to someone else in the bar. The surveillance room staff immediately discovered something unusual, so they cut off all communication. They even sent someone to retrieve it. A series of unusual actions made Max even more certain of his suspicion that all residents were always being monitored. Even conversations were eavesdropped on by someone in charge. The only thing Max didn't understand was that the camera could only monitor certain areas. People are always on the move, so how do they eavesdrop? At this time, Gilmer was flirting with the female bartender when his wife, Mimi, caught him. Gilmer angrily returned home and found Asia immersed in videos on his phone. The screen was full of scenes of Max and her sister having sex in the past. Gilmer angrily snatched the phone and immediately rushed to Max's room. Gilmer criticized Max for killing his eldest daughter and ex-wife. Now Max was also hurting Asia. Because of his guilt, Max did not dare to fight back. In no time, Max was beaten until his face was bruised. Luckily, at the critical moment, Max's mother rushed in and hit Gilmer on the head with a vase. The one-sided conflict ended, but when Max left the room, his mother burst into tears and hugged Gilmer. It turned out that the two had had an affair 20 years ago. The feelings of the rich were indeed complicated. When Asia learned that her father had beaten Max, she immediately rushed to apologize to him. At that time, she was so engrossed in her phone that she completely failed to notice her father enter. Max sighed and said that he did not blame anyone. It was only natural that Max had killed Gilmer's daughter, so he would receive some punishment. Asia silently looked at the man in front of her. She did not know how many times she had watched the video on her phone these past few days. Her hatred for him had long since disappeared, and she had even unintentionally fallen in love with him. In order to get the password to Gilmer's safe, Minerva ordered the bartender to take the initiative to approach him. A few drinks, and the atmosphere gradually became comfortable. The woman used all her tricks to finally get him hooked. She used the game of honesty as an excuse and cleverly included the password to the safe in the question. Gilmer was still careful not to write it down, but only recited a series of numbers. The artificial intelligence immediately analyzed his expression and physiological data. The probability of this answer being true exceeded 60%. Although it could not be absolutely confirmed, Jackson was already at Gilmer's house. Minerva did not have time to verify further, so she had to read out the number. Reality proved that her luck was not bad. The safe was indeed opened. Because of that, Jackson had cleared his doubts. Minerva saw that the opportunity was right, so she decided to pursue. Minerva used a virtual person to order Jackson to go to Bangkok to acquire a growing company. On this side, after many days of observation, Max finally discovered the location of the wiretapping. Max secretly took a metal clip from the bathroom and crawled under the blanket. He tried to take it off his hand. This was the thing that the staff had explained to him the first day he entered the shelter, that it was to monitor body data. In fact, it was a listening device, but Max still couldn't take it off. 3 years of imprisonment made him realize that there must be a trick in it. So Max went to Minerva to ask why she was monitoring and listening to everyone. Minerva didn't deny it, but she gave a reasonable reason. Minerva said that the apocalypse was extremely scary. With limited resources, she had to control everyone's actions and thoughts. Just one extremist could bring disaster and destruction to the entire shelter. Max saw that Minerva was talking nonsense. He accidentally saw a handbook about signals and security. An idea immediately came to Max's mind. When he left, he deliberately knocked over the computer. When Minerva turned her back, Max quickly stuffed the book into his chest. Perhaps because he had been in prison, he especially longed for freedom. While others were all living in the shelter, Max hated this life of being monitored everywhere from the bottom of his heart. Max immediately went to Asia and led her into the isolation room without cameras. He closed the door tightly and took out a piece of paper he had pared from his chest. He reminded her not to reveal it. Then he pointed to the bracelet. This thing could eavesdrop on their conversation. Max deliberately said ambiguous words to deceive the surveillance staff. As for the true meaning, he wrote it on the paper. Max planned to break the security system here and go out of the shelter to sea, but he couldn't do it alone, so he hoped Asia could help stop him. The two of them stood very close, making the atmosphere ambiguous. She almost lost the ability to think. She nodded in agreement without thinking. Then they both entered the room. Max closed the door tightly and pretended to be intimate. Of course, they covered the camera with cloth. No longer under surveillance, he took out the speaker he had prepared and attached it to his eavesdropping bracelet while soft music played. Finally, the two of them could talk freely. The surveillance staff could only worry and did not dare to rush into the room to stop them. Max took the opportunity to reveal that this shelter did not have an emergency staircase. This was clearly not in accordance with normal construction standards. After many days of investigation, he accidentally discovered a hidden sign. It turned out that the emergency staircase was hidden right on the ceiling. Since most of the area in the basement was under surveillance, Max based on the signal and security manual to create a detailed escape plan. He planned to damage the cable in the surveillance blind spot, causing a short circuit that would cause the self-protection system to shut down and restart. This would paralyze all the cameras in the public area. Then he used the explosion to create chaos and escape through the emergency stairs. The plan sounded simple, but it was not easy to execute. Both of them needed to continue to verify its feasibility. Meanwhile, Minerva in the surveillance room did not pay attention to Max's small actions. Minerva's entire spirit was placed on Gilmer's assistant. In order for him to spend a huge amount of money to buy her ghost company, she falsified the balance sheet and financial data, making the company both have human resources and profit potential. At the same time, to increase the authenticity, she started declaring corporate income tax for this company 3 years ago. After Jackson received the purchase order from Gilmer, he immediately flew to Thailand to survey the site. After so many transfers, he finally arrived. As soon as he entered the door, Jackson discovered that this company was indeed very different. It was more like a market than a company. Of course, all of this was intentionally created by Minerva, with the main purpose being to give people the impression of being full of life. But when he sat down at the negotiating table, Jackson was informed that someone had offered a higher purchase price. This made him extremely upset, so he frankly expressed his opinion to the boss that they should give up the original purchase plan. Minerva watched with both joy and worry. She quickly let the AI persuade him to think more. At the same time, in the shelter, Max and Asia were taking care of things carefully. After covering the camera and listening device, they used a bottle opener to make a round hole in the wall. There was a piece of wire hidden inside. They took it out, cut it, and then connected the wires together. Immediately after, the system started to reboot. At the same time, the communication between AI and Jackson was also interrupted. The organization's logo appeared on the phone screen. This immediately made Jackson suspicious. Minerva's team immediately checked the line, but they did not find any traces of broken circuits. Because Mark had quietly reconnected the cut line and used a stopwatch to calculate the system's reboot time to 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Although it was not long, this unsupervised period was enough for them to do a lot of things. In order to keep Jackson away from the net, Minerva deliberately sent a beautiful woman to trick him into a bar. Inside were all hired actors, just so he could indulge in his wildest dreams. The next morning, the girl said goodbye to Jackson. She also left her contact number and social media account. Minerva thought the opportunity had come, so she immediately used AI to pretend to be Gilmer and told Jackson to take over the company at all costs. When Jackson arrived, he found that the air conditioner on the entire floor was broken. This was also the organization's trick. The heat would make Jackson think only of leaving quickly. During the negotiation, she also called the company's competitors to put pressure on him. Last night's indulgence combined with the remaining alcohol made Jackson's head spin. He hadn't even finished reading the contract with his name written at the bottom of the page. Meanwhile, Mark and Asia in the underground bunker used the materials stolen from the warehouse to turn the kettle into a crude explosive device. The two of them repeated the old trick. They dug a round hole in the wall. At this time, Jackson was using the computer to pay for the company. Minerva watched the screen attentively. Suddenly, the underground system shook again, but she didn't have the mind to pay attention to anything. Until she confirmed that the $900 million had entered, everyone cheered with joy. The hard work finally paid off. The suspension of the surveillance system also gave Mark and Asia a chance to act. They quietly placed the modified kettle in the electrical room. When the coil continuously generated heat, the kettle immediately turned into a bomb. The two took advantage of the situation to use the fire extinguisher to create more chaos. At this time, Minerva was still immersed in the joy of having $900 million. Suddenly, an explosion sounded. The entire underground bunker was plunged into darkness. The shrill alarm and the thick smoke swirled together. Max took advantage of the chaos to safely release the ladder and hide. Seeing victory in sight, he immediately climbed up. Asia quickly returned to the room to reconnect the wires and try to erase all traces. Meanwhile, Jackson Jackson was already on the plane preparing to leave Bangkok when he saw a familiar figure on the brawler. It was the old woman who had acted with the girl the night before. He immediately had a bad feeling. He reopened the girl's social media account, only to find that the page was inaccessible. He searched for information about the bar online, but to no avail. Only then did Jackson realize that he might have been tricked. He immediately ordered the plane to turn back to Bangkok. When he arrived at the company office, there was no one there. Even the bar had disappeared. Jackson contacted Gilmer to ask for the truth. Jackson even deliberately asked what nickname Gilmer had given him in college. Only real people would know this secret. The intelligent AI was completely unable to answer. After Jackson confirmed that the Gilmer on the screen was not a real person, Jackson immediately decided to call the police. As soon as Jackson connected the call, the girl and a man quickly reappeared. Poor Jackson just died in broad daylight. In the underground bunker, Max had already reached the top floor and easily extracted the anesthetic from the receptionist's mouthpiece. Then, Max used the opponent's fingerprint computer to successfully open several doors leading outside. After Max put on his protective gear, he called Asia and prepared to say his final goodbyes to her. After speaking, Max put on his heavy protective helmet. From afar, Max saw security personnel rushing towards him. He quickly pressed the elevator button. Normal bullets could not penetrate protective layer at all. When the elevator reached the top floor, Max immediately saw the isolated door leading to the outside world. Max had no idea that the apocalypse was just a lie created by Minerva, but Max still opened the door without hesitation. The bright sunlight shone on his face. This movie also ended here. No one knows what he saw. Maybe it was another trap set by Minerva. And you, what do you think about this movie? Don't forget to leave your personal opinion in the comment section. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.